Okay, thank you everyone for being here. This is the first of two events of navigating the academic job market. This is part of the efforts of updating your prior beliefs that it means to update the prior struggles in junior academic life with data from senior researchers sharing their experiences. The idea is providing a space for dialogue and guidance to junior researchers. And this seminar series is seeking to remove the stigma against mental health difficulties and openly talk about topics such as work-life balance, career development, burnout, and mental well-being. So today, we have a really nice set of speakers. I will introduce themselves. I went to conference and I remember everyone said like, our speakers don't need a presentation. Well, it's true in this case, but in any case, I will say it. So we have Judith Rousseau. Judith is a professor of statistics at the University of Oxford, a fellow of Jesus College in Oxford, a fellow of the Institute of Mathematical and Statistics, and a fellow of the International Society of Bayesian Analysis. She won the Eiffel Nobel Prize of the Bernoulli Society for Mathematical Statistics and Probability, and she was awarded one of the really famous ERC advanced grants for her project, General Theory for Big Base. We also have Ruth King. Ruth King is, I think, that the coolest name for a chair that I can think of. She is the Thomas Bayes Chair of Statistics in the School of Mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. She was recognized by the Royal Society of Edinburgh as one of Scotland's leading female scientists and elected as fellow in 2018. She was also elected a fellow of the Learned Society of Wales and a fellow of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics in 2022. And then we have Francesco Stingo, that recently has been appointed as full professor of statistics at the Department of Statistics, Computer Science Applications, j-ISBA of the University of Florence. She did all his education in the US, and then he came back to Italy in having one of the really well-known and recognized Bandi Montalcini, that it's to do the return of brains, return of the cerebelli, from the international to try to take back to Italy all the really good researchers. So he won the Rita Levi Montalcini Fellowship at the Department of Statistics, Computer Science, and Applications j-ISBA. He's an assistant, he's a full professor now there, and he's an associate editor of a lot of journals that we know, Bayesian Analysis, Stat Methods in Applications, Biometrical Journal, and Editorial Electronic Journal of Statistics, and so forth. So I'm really thankful for all you three to have accepted this invitation. And we are really grateful to have you here. First of all, I will thank all, well, second of all, because I already thank you. Second of all, I would like to thank you, all the j-ISBA members and especially the j-ISBA board for putting all this effort into organizing this, and to Fan Bu, that she was the main head designing all this and organizing everything. So she is in the US, she cannot join us, and that's why you're stuck with me. Apologies for that. So the panel will be divided into 4 different parts, and we will call the part -0 or 0. When it comes before the job market, so about the timeline, all the preparations that we will require to do, then we will talk about the actual application, the package, and all that stuff, then the interview process, and we finalize with the after interview parts of that. We have received some questions from our members that they send it through email. But in case you are here and participating here and you have extra questions, please feel free to send them through the chat. So let's start. So what would be the typical timeline of the new faculty search in your department or institution, or in general in the Europe region? Because we know that it's totally different than the US. If someone wants to start, sorry, I didn't say who.
I'm happy. So jobs can be advertised at any time of the academic year. It's not all come out at one point. It's normally, I would say, September to December more common to see adverts coming out. But as I say, we just had one that closed 2 months ago, or last month, and so on. So they are all year round. Most, or at least in Edinburgh, jobs are advertised for usually 4 weeks from being live to the closing date. And then after the closing date, it's normally interviewed within anything between 2 and 4 weeks after a long listing process. So candidates are given a minimum of 2 weeks notice before the interview itself. And that's normally 2 weeks after the closing date. So it's about 4 to 6 weeks after the closing date. In terms of where the jobs are advertised, jobs.ac.uk is a very common one. All jobs are advertised there. Usually mailing lists are used as well. So in the UK, Allstat is the primary one.
Anything else that Judith wants to share about the UK and also France job market, your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, I completely follow what Ruth was saying. It's exactly the same in Oxford. So, yeah, it can be from advertised 4 or 6 weeks in advance. Sometimes it's a little longer. But I guess it depends on the job. So it's whether it's a postdoc job or whether it's a lecture job. So full-time like a permanent position in France. So for the postdoc, this is exactly what Ruth was saying. For a full-time, like a permanent position in France, like a lecture position, in France, it's the timeline is usually like a bit national. So although it's supposed to be like as time comes, it's fairly national, and everybody apply together at the same time, and the jobs are advertised in the fall, and then the application process actually is later in the year. So like the jobs as the timeline is like March or April for applying, and then interviews in May or something, and then you hear about, and then something along with May and June. So it depends very much on what kind of jobs you're looking for, whether it's a postdoc or a full-time position. I mean, full-time, permanent position.
Thank you. And Francesco?
Yeah. In Italy, the job calls are out for 1 month, more or less, on the official website of the Ministry of Education. And that's the only regular thing we have. Otherwise, in terms of timing, it may happen any time during the year. And it usually take from 2 to 6, 7 months, depends on many factors, to go from the call to the appointment, and the appointment can start any time of the year. And that's for faculty positions, permanent positions. For postdocs, we should have a similar website, but usually those are advertised through mailing lists and things like that. So really, there's not a fixed rule. Beside the website, everything can change a lot.
Thank you so much to all of you. How early do you recommend to start preparing for all these, like to start doing the package, the CV and all that stuff?
I'm not
Maybe
quite
Judith?
sure. So I can, what do you mean by how early? I mean, depends whether you've done it once or before or not.
Or I'm guessing that the first time.
So, well, again, it depends on the job that you're asked. I would say, I mean, I don't know. It's not a huge amount of work, so you need to have like a well-prepared CV. And there are 3 things for me that are important. So I think I'm jumping ahead of the second part of your, but it doesn't matter because it goes with it. For me, there are 3 things that are important. One is a CV, which is like clear, and so we can see what you have achieved. The second is the research project and how you want to blend in And again, it depends on the kind of position. So, okay, so let's take it as generic as it is for the moment. And the third is reference letters. And then it depends on the country. Like in France, reference letters are not so important. People are sort of skeptical about them. In the UK, they are super important. And so it depends on where you are. And so, I think like a week is enough, but it all depends on how confident you feel. I mean, you need to ask referees before, so this might take a little more time. Writing down the sort of research statement and things like that, sometimes it takes a week or two. Depends on the people, but it's probably the longest is probably writing down the research statement.
Yeah. So yesterday we should have to start doing this. Well, thank you so much.
One thing I would add is that one thing I have found really useful over the years is to always have an up-to-date CV with all the information in. So every time you get a paper accepted, put something in. Every time you're asked on a committee, put that in. And then you can always remove these and tailor it to where you're doing it. But having to rack your brains to try and add all these in at a later date is really not good. So it's better to just do it as you're going along and always have an up-to-date CV.
And Italy is the same, always be ready because you never know when those calls will be out. So always be ready and follow the suggestion you have just heard, definitely. So, and one general suggestion I would like to give right now is just talk to people, because that's very general, because things can change a lot, country to country, university to university. And just to give you an example, in Italy, we have this position that is kind of assistant professor, but we call it ricercatore, like researcher, but there are different types, researcher A, B, now they have a new types, it's called RTT, and that's something you can find in the documents, official documents in the call, but there are also other things that you cannot find in the call, that like, what are the funds used to open this call? And those are very relevant for your career. And so really get to know people, talk to them, ask for info, because that's the basic advice that I can give anybody, because things can change dramatically, and you cannot even realize it looking at the official kind of call or official documents. So really talk to people to get the insights you really need to make your choices.
Thank you all. So just is there any suggestions that you can give to researchers that have a more applied background or a diverse background to try to find a more methods-focused research position? It's something that was asked in the chat. Judith, you're on mute.
And just so that, so the question is, if somebody comes from like a different background, like biology or something like that, and they want to move into something more methodological and like a core of stats, what should they do, or something like that? Or...
Sorry,
Yes.
I asked the question. Yeah, that was my question. In my case, it's pure math, the background, not
right,
biology,
I guess.
epidemiology, but I guess many others are in the same situation, that they developed Bayesian methods just in applied world, and then they want to change a bit to more methods focused. I guess many are in this situation.
And so the question is, what should we do, or how can you apply for the job for that? So I'm not quite sure what the question is. How can you move from one to the other? Or...
Yes, I just experienced that. I think I once applied for something in more methods oriented or pure stats, and I felt that there was a bit of a not much trust in kind of my foundations, because I came from very applied, in my case, malaria epidemiology field, and I think it was what's not so clear what background I bring, and I felt that it's probably difficult to switch if you cannot show a clear degree in statistics or a collaboration with some well-known people.
Yeah. So I guess Ruth probably has a better way to answer. So I'm going to start. So I'm more theoretical so far. So I'm probably harder to convince. So I will talk from the harder to convince perspective. I guess indeed, I think you need to convince the person that you'll be able to do the job somehow, and so it's not like we don't like people who do that. It's just when we have a postdoc position, for instance, there are some kind of research topic that we want to attack, and you want to make sure that the person you're hiring will be able to attack these research questions. And so in order to convince the person, I would suggest strongly to go and talk to the person. So to go and maybe meet the person in advance, and just to show what your abilities are, and to put some evidence that you are actually have the knowledge and the background to be able to do that.
So I strongly agree with that. And I mean, I would say in Edinburgh we have, in the academic permanent academic staff, we have someone who is an engineer, we have someone who is a physicist who have transferred across different fields. And it's that communications. And one thing we'll come on to later in the questions, but I'll mention it here as well, is the importance of the cover letter to explain this and make the case. And you make the case of why you have the skills for the particular position. But it's also good not just to do it in a cover letter, but as Judy says, contact the person and have some dialogue and explain this. The other thing that can be, so there's two steps. One is to get to an interview stage, and then there's to do it at the interview stage. And we have asked people who have come in with slightly different backgrounds, you know, at the interview, convince us why you're able to do this in the stats field. And they have. You know, and it's looking at where you're going and so on. One piece of evidence that can help with that is if you have some publications in core stats journals. You know, it doesn't have to be sort of the methodological theory stats journals, computing in stats. Those types of just show that there is that's your direction of travel is in those fields, and then you just have to really make the case. But it is possible, and I think it's great that stats is able and has this diversity of people coming into the field. I think it strengthens it for that.
You know, I agree with everything, but I have to add that in other systems like the Italian one is a bit more rigid somehow, particularly for faculty position. What only matters is your CV, basically. There's not a real job interview like in other systems. So it's hard to convince someone, because they have to evaluate you just based on your CV. Okay. So, and for example, in Italy, when you apply to a position, that position is really within what you call like a topic. You know, we have used that position in statistics. There's one topic, we call it settore concorsuale, or, you know, the topic. Then there's another topic is maybe medical statistics, like biostatistics, epidemiology. Then if you are more in that other field, you have to apply for positions that are within that medical statistic sector. Okay, so it's a bit harder. For postdocs, maybe the suggestion that you just received from Judith and Ruth are still valid in Italy as well. For faculty position, unfortunately not that much, so you have to show first that you are able to do some stat publication, and then you can apply. Otherwise it will be very hard to be judged well, because everything will be judged with respect to the sector that call correspond to. So either is maybe statistics, or is medical statistics, or maybe econometrics, or whatever. Okay, so that's it's a bit harder in Italy to switch field before you actually have done some good work in the field you want to go to.
Thank you. Now that Ruth talked about cover letters and all that stuff, what will be, I will moving now to the package, and then if time, I will go back to some of the questions that we left behind. But what will be the typical documents required in the application for the department that, or other departments that you had been in committees and have seen?
Okay, I seem to be always the one to start, so I'll start again. So, well, as I was mentioning it before, I think it depends on the job you are applying for. So if it's a postdoc, and then the typical documents that you are asked for are, well, a CV, with your list of publications within the CV, of course, and the list of conferences you went to, and what you've done so far, of course. Then there is the research statement, where you've described, you summarize what you've worked on and you explain what you want to work on. So like really what are the important questions. I would suggest that it's not too long. And so essentially you don't want to say a lot of things, you want to say the important things. Because when people read the applications, they read quite a bit. They might have to read a lot of applications, and so they're not. If it's too long, they're going to skip a bit of the things. So emphasize on the important stuff and don't spend too much time otherwise. And then then like in the UK, reference letters are important. In France, if you were to apply for the job, you might have also to send the PhD report. So you have to write down a report when you have a PhD, and by the examiners. So the examiners write down the reports, and you might have to give the reports of the examiners. In the UK, it's not asked.
What is asked in the UK, though, in addition to those, is a teaching statement. And even though it's not necessarily always compulsory, I put a lot of effort when I read them into cover letters, and we'll come on to why later, so I'll save that for later, but that can be also important. And the other thing, so just to go on what Judy was saying as well, particularly in your CV, signposting, when you're reading lots, you are reading them quickly, make sure it's very clearly signposted, the important parts. Don't have too much text, make it bullet points, headings, same in the research statement as well, make it very, very clear to extract information fast.
Yeah, in Italy it's very different in a sense that we don't have research statements or teaching statement. Reference letters now occasionally for some positions are required, but most of the time are not. So it's all based basically on evaluation or your CV. So make sure that everything that is important, and everything is important, is clear, is easily found in your CV. So that's definitely very important. And in other systems like in the US, for example, reference letters are super important, but that's a discussion for another day, right? So sticking to Europe, at least sticking to Italy, yeah. Make sure that all documents required are uploaded, including the copy of your documents, like the ID and so on and so forth, and are written in the proper format. So there's some, make sure that from a bureaucratic point of view, admin point of view, your documents are perfect. Okay, that's very important as well. So don't rush when it comes to write those CVs or all the other documents. Okay.
Thank you. So I think that this question won't apply to Italy because you don't need teaching statement or cover letters or so, but for the other parts of the world, which one do you think would be the most important document that a candidate should put more effort in? Maybe.
I'll go first because Judy's gone first every other time. I would say your CV, but actually I think there's less effort needs to go into that if you've got an up-to-date CV anyway. That's a continuing process. And then beyond that, the research statement, and I completely agree with everything Judy said, don't make it too long, and the cover letter. And I will say what I think about the cover letter, it comes into sort of where people go wrong a lot of the time. Cut and paste errors I see a lot. I would like to apply to a different university I have seen, not good. But also with the research statement is fairly self-evident what goes into that. But with a cover letter, it's less clear. And that's where I see a lot of mistakes of people doing it, where either that's generic, there's nothing specific about the university that you're applying for or the post that you're applying to. So there should be something specific that shows that actually you are applying for this job, and it doesn't let on that you're applying for lots of others potentially. But also in that cover letter, it's to say, don't put the emphasis on why the job would be good for you. What you would bring to the job should be the emphasis. And also things you can include is who you would collaborate with, if it's particularly if it's a permanent position, internally, externally, what your ambitions are, and that type of thing, or what you bring and how it fits with other things, that strategic positioning of the school or the university.
Thank you. Something that someone else wants to add?
No, I'm fully with Ruth. It's the same. So in France, the research statement and the cover letter, they can be together in a sense. So you have a first paragraph where you explain why you want to apply for the job, and then so what you bring and what you get with it, and why you can blend well with the team you're going to work with. So these are the really important stuff, and then you have your research statement afterwards. So yeah, for me, the research statement was including these ones. But so yeah, the cover, definitely you want to explain why you apply to this job in particular and what you can bring to the university.
Thank you. I will skip the Italy part because apparently there's only the CV, so that's fine. But talking about the CV, any expectations about the number of publications that they will need for first a permanent position or a postdoc? So because they are two different words for to apply. Now, Francesco, because I skip, you want to start?
Okay, yeah. So for permanent positions, there is not, a minimum number needed, but it really depends on the university. But by law, you have to include up to 12 publications. Okay, and that's a lot for a first, for an assistant professor position and so on. But that's by law. So somehow when if you really want to stay in Italy, for example, or come to Italy from abroad, someone does it, not many, but maybe strategically you can plan a bit on the quantity early on. Even small publications may be okay, because sometimes the way you evaluate it is based on points. You have 12 publications, each publication gets points, and at the end of the day, the guy who gets the most points gets the position. So even you don't want to leave any space empty, you want to fill all the 12 slots basically. So maybe a simple conference proceedings that are maybe or things like that. So definitely there's not a minimum number of publications you have to include. But if you can include 12 publications, that's better. Of course, the one on well-known international journals are the one that count the most. But still having all the 12 slots filled will help you a bit. So
Thank you.
I would say that it's not. UK is completely different. You just put in what you like. It's so with people assessing it and not just looking at quantity. Quality outweighs quantity every single time. So there is no magic number, I'm afraid. But go for quality as well and breadth. So it's trying to get a balance of some really good papers and then a few other ones that are less good. That's what I would generally suggest to early career people.
Yeah, another thing is that it depends on when your PhD was. Like if you're just like finishing your PhD or out of your PhD, of course, people expect less publications. If you've had a few years postdocs, then the expectation is higher. I mean, this is very, very logical. One thing is that when you are just out of your PhD or you're finishing your PhD, this is perfectly normal to put preprints because you don't expect people to have already accepted papers. So don't hesitate to write on the preprints and to explain which state you are in the preprints, like whether it's under revision, minor, major, or resubmit and things like that. This is valuable information in a sense.
if I can add something, in Italy we try to follow the same criteria somehow, but So quality, and try to understand what's the stage of the applicant, just out of the PhD, or, but there's also some constraints by law. And in terms, for example, preprint cannot really be evaluated directly. And, this number 12 is always there. You cannot change it, So maybe it depends where you want to apply. You may have to take a bit different strategic decisions. Okay, yeah. Even though we try to follow the same criteria, generally speaking, but there are these very strict constraints by law.
Thank you. Just before Judith mentioned about someone applying after a postdoc, would it be detrimental for a successful job application if a candidate had been for longer in a postdoc, like a postdoc of more than 3 years?
I would say it goes back to what Judith was saying, that it depends on your CV, and as long as if you're publishing really strong papers within that, and then you make your case, there may be very good reasons why you've spent years in a particular place for personal reasons, for example, and you should. I personally think that that's fine to include in a cover letter, and also career breaks and things. So no, it's just your potential and your track record for your career stage will be assessed.
Agree.
Thank you. I will just start going faster. So all of you already mentioned some common mistakes, but is there a particularly or common or bad mistake that you have seen in the applications, apart from the ones that we have seen, like copy paste and not being personalized the application? Not
following the instructions. So that could be not submitting a particular piece of paperwork that you should, or when you asked for a 2-page research statement, writing a 10-page.
Yeah, and also not really being clear in why you apply to this particular job. I mean, we've said it before, but for me, this is like the most common mistake I've seen, is that people explain what they've done and then they don't talk at all about where they want to apply and why they want to apply to this particular place. And this always leaves a weird impression.
Yeah, I will give the same suggestion that Ruth just given. And in Italy, you have to submit less documents, so there's less room for mistakes. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And what would be a really good thing that you have seen in applications in the past, and do you recommend that our members will do or will add?
It's hard to know. It's like every application is a bit different from one to the other. So I'm going to say one. It doesn't mean that you all have to write down the same. And one thing I value, I think, is like when you can see in the application a vision of the person who is applying. So if you can sort of show where you want to go and what are the important research questions for you, and you can see some vision, like then you stand out of the lot, in a sense, like people say, yeah, that's interesting. So this is something to, I don't know how, and then everybody do it in a different way, but this is.
One thing I would say is if you look at the job descriptions, at least in the UK, you'll have a very clear set of essential criteria and desirable criteria. And if they're very specific ones, one thing I have seen done is to literally list the criteria and then say how you actually address that, how you satisfy that criteria. It can make things overly long, so I think there's a bit of caution with doing it, but that is one thing that can be useful.
Yeah, I don't have much to add because, we don't use cover letters or research statements and so on and so forth. So,
but maybe a j-ISBA, B in the CV will be important. No, I'm kidding. Really budget. Okay, yeah. Let's go finally.
Yeah, published there. Yeah, put it there.
Let's talk about now finally the interview process. What is the interview process in or how does a regular interview process will look like in your different departments or institutions? How many stages are the interview? How many candidates are typically shortlisted? How it will look like?
Shall I go first? So in the UK, if there's one job, sometimes there's multiple jobs, but there's normally shortlist up to 6. That doesn't scale linearly, just to say. So if there was 2 jobs, it might be 6, 7 or 8. And then there's normally just one phase. So there's an invite to interview. The interview will be several components. Most in the UK will give all 3 of these, some will only give 2, but there's a research presentation, and on that, it shouldn't necessarily be a standard research presentation. You want to be selling yourself and sort of do them perhaps a little bit less depth, but get more overview of breadth that you might be doing. Not everywhere, but I think it's very common now in the UK is to also give a teaching talk. So sort of a mini lecture is normally about 15 minutes where you're told what to present on. And then there's the more nerve-wracking interview panel where there'll probably be about 5 people on the other side of the table. And that's normally about 30 to 45 minutes where you get quizzed on lots of different things. And basically to prepare for that, look at what the criteria are. It will be on research, it will be on teaching, if it's not covered in the teaching talk part. It will be on things like where you're looking to apply for grants, what is your future research plan, how else do you contribute, and how you fit, who you would collaborate with. And then at that point, you have a sigh of relief, go away, and then normally people are informed within a week. There's a little bit of variability here, but it's normally within a week if you've been successful or not.
I guess it depends on the job. So what Ruth was talking about is much more like lectureship. And so for lectureship in the UK, in Oxford, I have essentially the same kind of experience. So you have a bit of you have a bit of teaching to show evidence for, and then you have a research presentation, and you have the questions with the in France, it's quite different. In France, when you apply for a job like a lectureship, it's just half an hour interview where you make a presentation, let's say 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you have 15 minutes questions. So it's quite short. So a lot of the decision is made based on the quality of your reports and things like that. And then the interview, how you answer the questions. And then I can't remember what was the other question, actually, what was part of the question.
The number of shortlisted candidates.
So not too many, because so it will be 6, 6 to 10 at most. 10 is like, and it's the same in France. 10 is an upper bound. Usually you try to make it in a day, and so it's an upper bound.
Thank you.
Yeah, in Italy, it really depends if you apply to a postdoc or assistant professor type of position, because for postdocs, you have to present your work, and you have a kind of short interview, like half an hour or so, but that really counts in terms of selection process. So it's very important, okay? Instead, if you apply for an assistant professor position, basically all depends on your CV, basically. And even though if you have a short interview, like 20 minutes, half an hour maximum, where you present your work and the committee asks you a question, that basically helps the committee to clarify what you've done in your CV, but you're evaluated just based on your CV. So there is not, formally, by law, again, that cannot be considered in the evaluation reports. Okay, so just a way to present yourself, but formally doesn't really count. Okay. In terms of people shortlisted, I'm not sure about that. I think that it depends on the university, probably 6, but I think maybe more in other occasions. But yeah, that's something I'm not sure about.
Thank you. I agree with Ruth. It's harder to assess candidates in Italy, I think it seems.
Yeah.
So, do you have a list of criteria that you could share with the people here to evaluate the candidates? If it's okay, if not, or if you don't have like some stuff that can be highlighted of the things that have been assessed.
I mean, it depends specifically on the job, but it will be things like research publications, research potential, fit to the group. We have interviewed some absolutely stellar statisticians, but they would not fit the group. It wasn't a good match. So that is also part of it. But they're the sort of the primary things. But I'd also add to that your sort of wider contributions to the statistical community. I also value, which will also show like collegiality and so on.
Yeah, I guess it depends again on the stage where you and the kind of job. But so if you're really an early stage researcher, like just out of your PhD or the research, so that what Ruth has said, like research quality and where you want to go. So whether you have already gained some autonomy from your supervisor, this is something we look at. And which is something you can show by showing where you want to go. So the typical kind of questions that take place in the sort of interviews are what do you see are the open questions in your field, and where do you want to go there? Another question that takes place in interviews is if you were to cite among the research you've done one that was for which you are the most proud of, which we would be and why. So these kind of things is to see what is your vision. So this is something we are sort of looking at. And
Again, sorry.
But for more advanced researchers, so if you have like a couple of years later or something like that, in the UK in particular, you might be quizzed in terms of how you see yourself getting some grants. So this is also which might be sort of related to how you fit in the sort of wider community, and it's also very important how you fit. You will fit in the department, what you will bring to the department, and how you will melt into the department as well.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, in Italy again, it's very different. And just a quick remark. That's what I'm discussing. What happens in the public Italian universities? There are some that are not public. The Bocconi, for example, that everybody knows. They have a different system. Makes sense. But so in terms of the public universities, each university is. Some rules that define how this point system that you have to use to hire people works. So that many points for publication, that many points for teaching, that many points for that and those. And then each committee basically starting from these general rules that come from the university, then some more specific rules. Okay, so definitely you have to read those rules to understand what really matters the most. And then, of course, there is a committee that can interpret their rules differently, committee from committee. So there's a lot of variability there as well. But yeah, and then the other thing is that we cannot really restrict, the position to someone interested in biostatistics with respect to asymptotic theory or something like that. Within the statistics kind of sector, we have to pick the best, but always there is no which one fits best in the department, or which one, any topic that is more interesting than others. There is nothing like that. It just by law the committee has to pick the best candidate. Okay, so very different.
Yes. Well, thank you. So I will meld two questions together. Is there something that you will definitely recommend to do or to prepare for the upcoming interviews, and something that you wouldn't recommend? So woulds and wouldn't.
Do your homework on the department. Look at what courses they are teaching, look who there is, look beyond the department, look at other schools, look at even near institutions, do homework. Then that's always been the most fatal mistake I have seen. In terms of what you wouldn't do, I'd probably say don't dress casual. But I'm struggling on that one.
Yeah, I think I would emphasize the homework very much. So so if the position is a postdoc position, then the teaching, what they do in terms of teaching in the department is less important, unless there is a teaching requirement in the position. If it's like both teaching and research position, do the homework both on the teaching and on the research. It might sound a bit artificial, but it really isn't. Like somebody who comes and hasn't looked on who's working on what in the department and what are the courses they could do, it doesn't look good. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, again, in Italy, the interview doesn't count that much, particularly for assistant professors, for postdoc, of course, but you already know who you're gonna work with. So that's, do the homework on the, the people that are gonna, on the person that's gonna hire you, definitely. And, also when some of those suggestions maybe a bit apply also in Italy in a sense that if people, see that you can fit well in the department, even though it shouldn't count, maybe eventually may count a bit, not that much, because by law you're required again to evaluate just the CV, but you have an opportunity to present yourself, and the general suggestion that Ruth and Judith have given you are definitely good to present yourself at the best.
Thank you. And now when the interview is over, and then they always ask you anything you want to ask of, what are good questions, or what kind of questions are good or necessary to ask in here?
I think again, it depends on what happened before. So if you've already showed that you've been like looking around in the department and what are the things, how you could connect to the department, and if you've shown this evidence, and they ask you do you have any questions for us, and you don't have any question for them, then don't ask any question, because it's just a waste of time in a sense. If you have some questions about is it possible to have to co-supervise PhD students, and do ask them. So like if this is something like any kind of curiosity that you can show in the department on how you can be involved more and more in the department, any question that shows that are welcome, but then it all depends on what you've said before.
I'd agree with that. Showing some collegiality is good. But if you don't have a question, I think it's always been quite good when I've seen that reply. Rather than just say no, but no, I've had the opportunity to already ask those questions to people, because you will have chatted to people, is a nice way of doing it. The other thing that I've seen asked, which I like personally, is when there's asked, particularly for if it's your first permanent position, or if it's a postdoc position, is to ask about mentoring that is available in the school.
Yeah, we don't have this stage of the interview, so sorry. You can do that like offline before applying and such, and that the suggestion you have received so far are very good, but not within the interview process.
Thank you so much. And then we are getting towards the end. The interview process has passed. Is it good to send an email to thank the panel for the interview? And in case, well, we learned that some cases their decisions are really fast, like in the UK, it's 1 week or so. In case the candidate was not elected, is it a good idea to ask for feedback about that?
Okay, I'll start. So the email that you receive from the candidates after, I mean, it's always like you were thinking, it's always nice, even though you know that it's like you can read it as the person wants to look good. I don't know, but it's I mean, so it's always nice. So it doesn't matter whether you send. I think, but it doesn't matter whether you send them or not. So I think it will make no difference on the decision at the end. It's just like it's just a bit like politeness. So it's so it might matter afterwards when you meet the person a year later or say, yeah. So but that's the only difference it will bring. So what was the second question?
That if the candidate didn't get the job,
yes, the feedback. So the feedback, if you were to ask for feedback, the person you should ask is the chair of the committee. Don't go and ask some personal person, some specific person whom you've known more or less, because it's always a bit awkward and unpleasant. And so, but ask for the chair of the committee, because then you'll have the official feedback and somehow the important information you need to have.
We've been really in full agreement all the way along. So I'm going to have a slight disagreement with Judith, is that whenever I get one of these emails, I always feel it a bit awkward of know how to actually reply to them. And it may be partly because it's a very fast turnaround that, you know, the decision is often made very quickly that day or the next day regarding the applicants, and it's just then the HR cogs that have to turn to get formal offers out. So I always feel a little bit awkward, but again, it makes no difference. So I think it's personal preference of the person sending it. And again, I don't think you lose anything by asking for feedback, but normally I'm not sure it's very useful feedback that comes back, but you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, again, Italy is very different. Don't send any email that is not a formal communication to the committee until the committee has concluded its work. Definitely don't do that, because it's not, I guess it's against the law and etc. After everything is concluded, then you can ask for feedbacks to the chair of the committee. Informally, you can also formally request, we have these minutes of the meetings of the committee, like official documents that details why candidate get certain points and how things are evaluated. And this kind of a formal, you can then formally request those documents, even though it's not seen as something super nice, but maybe you can get the same amount, same type of information, asking, people, the chair of the committee, or maybe through some other people informally, and but definitely after everything is done, after the selection has been made and everything is concluded.
Thank you so much. So we have time, I think, that for one quick question that was sent through the people that has been signing. In the US, it's common to combine 1 year of postdoc followed by a tenure track position directly in the same job market. Is it even possible to do that in Europe, or do people have to go twice in the job market? To the job market?
I don't think I've ever seen it in Europe, but I don't know. I've never seen it in Europe.
I've also not seen it, but there are now some positions coming in which are sort of, so in the UK we don't have tenure track. It's just permanent job offer or not at the lecturer, assistant professor upwards, and all postdocs generally are fixed term. But there are now positions coming in which are sort of in the middle, which are sort of tenure track, but you're very, very likely to be permanent at the end. So in Edinburgh, they're called Chancellor's Fellowships, where you get reduced teaching. So it's more like an independent postdoc and then it tailors down and you do more teaching, it ramps up the teaching as it goes on. And it's not as formal as the US in tenure. It's really, at the end of that. It's more just, have you proven that you're doing okay, and it's and then it's a tick across. And I think in Edinburgh, for example, of however many of these have been through, in the 50, 60, 70, it might be one case that didn't get made permanent. So, and these are now becoming more common in the UK. They're called something slightly different in different institutions, which complicates matters. So that sort of is slightly different again, though.
Yeah, definitely not possible in Italy. You have to apply to every single position. It's a different public competition. Very rigid system.
Yeah, so in France, it's like in Italy, you have to apply to the position. In Oxford, they have this fellowship, they call it the Nightingale Fellowship, which might be a good way in to get into a permanent position later on in Oxford, but it's not automatic at all. So you would have to apply to the position afterwards.
Thank you. I also know that in Warwick, there's the Harrison Fellowship, that it's kind of the Nightingale position at Oxford. So we finally finished with all the questions that were there, unless someone in this call have a question. I think that's a no. Well, I will thank you all for being here and sharing all the experience. Hopefully all will have updated our prior beliefs, and maybe in some years' time, we will all have a permanent position somewhere else, thanks to all your tips. And thank you so much for accepting to do this.
Thank you and good luck.
Yep, thanks very
Thank
much.
you for inviting me, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.